Imagine being locked in a tiny room. You can touch both walls with your arms stretched out. There's a bed, a toilet, and a small window so high you can barely see the sky. Now imagine staying in that room for 30 years. Not 30 days. Not 30 months. 30 years. This is the story of a man who lived in that room. A man who was told he would die there. A man who everyone believed was a murderer. But here's the twist that will shake you to your core. He didn't do it. He was innocent. And the scariest part? The people in charge knew there were problems with his case from the very beginning. This is the true story of Anthony Ray Hinton. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think so far. Trust me, you don't want to miss where this goes next. Now here's where things get strange. When the police show up at Anthony's house to arrest him, he's confused. He doesn't understand what's happening. He tells them he didn't do it. He tells them he was at work when one of the murders happened. He has people who saw him there, people who can prove he was nowhere near the crime scene. But the police don't seem to care about that. One of the officers looks at Anthony and says something chilling. He says, "I don't care whether you did it or not. You're going to be convicted because you're black and the victims were white." Let that sink in for a moment. A police officer, someone who's supposed to protect everyone equally, just told a man that the color of his skin would decide his fate. Not the evidence. Not the truth. Just his skin color. Anthony is arrested and taken to jail. He's scared, but he's also certain that the truth will come out. He didn't commit these crimes. He has an alibi proof that he was somewhere else when one of the murders happened. Surely the court will see that. Surely justice will work the way it's supposed to. But justice doesn't always work the way it's supposed to. The case against Anthony relies on one main piece of evidence: a gun. The police find an old revolver at his mother's house. Anthony's mother kept it for protection. The police claim that bullets from this gun match the bullets found at the crime scenes. They say their expert tested it and confirmed the match. Anthony knows this can't be true. That gun hadn't been fired in years. It was rusty and old. But he's just one man sitting in a jail cell. Who's going to believe him over the police and their experts? His mother scrapes together every bit of money she has to hire a lawyer. But they can only afford to pay a small amount, barely enough to interest anyone. The lawyer they get agrees to take the case, but there's a problem. He's a personal injury lawyer. He handles car accidents and slip-and-fall cases. He's never defended anyone in a death penalty murder trial before. And this is a death penalty case. If Anthony is convicted, he won't just go to prison. He'll be sentenced to die. The lawyer knows he needs an expert to challenge the state's gun evidence. This is the most important part of the case. If he can prove that the bullets don't match the gun, Anthony walks free. But experts cost money. Good experts who know guns and bullets inside and out, they cost a lot of money. The lawyer asks the judge for more money to hire a proper expert. The judge says no. He gives him just a tiny amount, so little that no qualified expert will take the job. The lawyer searches and searches. Finally, he finds someone willing to work for that price. But this expert has a big problem. He's nearly blind. He can barely see, and his expertise, it's questionable. He doesn't have the proper tools. He doesn't have the right experience. But he's all the lawyer can afford, so he's the one who will testify at trial. When the trial begins, the state brings in their experts. They sound confident and professional. They show the jury charts and photographs. They say the bullets match the gun found at Anthony's house. They make it sound absolutely certain. Then Anthony's expert takes the stand. He struggles. He can't answer questions clearly. He makes mistakes. The jury watches him fumble, and you can see it in their faces. They don't believe him. They believe the state's experts. Anthony sits in the courtroom watching his life fall apart. He keeps thinking about what that police officer said. You're going to be convicted because you're black. And as the trial goes on, those words start to feel less like a threat and more like a prophecy. The jury is all white. The victims were white. Anthony is black, and the evidence that should prove his innocence, his alibi, the problems with the gun evidence gets pushed aside like it doesn't matter. After days of testimony, the jury goes to deliberate. Anthony waits. His mother waits. They pray. They hope. They believe that somehow the truth will win. The jury comes back. The verdict: guilty, guilty of murder. Guilty on all counts. Anthony's heart drops. The room spins. This can't be happening. He didn't do this. But the jury doesn't believe him. Then comes the sentencing. The judge has two options: life in prison or death. The judge chooses death. Anthony Ray Hinton is sentenced to die in Alabama's electric chair. He's taken away from the courthouse in chains. He's driven to a place called Holman Prison. This is where Alabama keeps the men it plans to kill. They call it Death Row. When Anthony arrives at Death Row, he's put in a cell that measures 5 feet by 7 feet. It's smaller than most people's bathrooms. There's a metal bed bolted to the wall, a sink, and a toilet. That's it. No privacy, no comfort. Just concrete and metal. The guards tell him this is where he'll spend 23 hours a day, every day, for the rest of his life. The only time he'll leave is for 1 hour of exercise in a slightly bigger cage. He can't touch another person. He can't hug his mother when she visits. There's always glass or bars between them. And here's the worst part. At any moment the state could decide it's time. They could come to his cell, walk him down a hallway, and strap him into the electric chair. They call it Yellow Mama, a nickname that makes something horrifying sound almost friendly. It's painted yellow, and it's killed dozens of men. Anthony lies on his bed that first night, staring at the ceiling. He thinks about his mother. He thinks about his life, how just weeks ago he was a free man, going to work every day. Now he's here, waiting to die for something he didn't do. But Anthony makes a decision that night. A decision that will define the next 30 years of his life. He decides he won't let them break him. He won't let this place take his soul. He didn't commit murder, and he won't let the world forget that. Somehow, some way, he'll prove his innocence. But how? He has no money. He has no powerful friends. He's locked in a cell 23 hours a day. The courts have already decided he's guilty. The system has already written him off. What Anthony doesn't know yet is that help is coming. It's far away, and it will take years to arrive, but it's coming. And when it does, it will shake the entire justice system. Want to know what happens next? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of Anthony's incredible journey. And drop a comment. Do you think the system failed him, or was this something even worse? The days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. Anthony watches men around him lose their minds. Some scream through the night. Some give up and stop talking altogether. Some become violent. Others just fade away, like ghosts. Death Row is designed to break people. It's not just about waiting to die. It's about the torture of waiting, never knowing when your day will come. You hear the guard's footsteps in the hallway, and your heart races. Is today the day? Are they coming for me? Men are executed. Anthony hears about it. Sometimes he can hear the preparations, the guards walking a man down the hall for the last time. The other inmates bang on their cell doors, shouting, making noise. It's their way of saying goodbye, their way of honoring a man who's about to die. Anthony attends the executions in his mind. He imagines what those men feel in their final moments. He imagines himself in that chair, and he wonders, when will it be my turn? But something unexpected happens during these dark years. Something that gives Anthony a reason to keep fighting, to keep believing he's still human. He makes a friend. Not just any friend. This friend is someone who, by all logic, should be his enemy. Someone whose beliefs represent everything Anthony has suffered because of. This friendship seems impossible. Yet it happens, and it changes everything. But that's a story for what comes next. Because Anthony's journey is just beginning, and the twists ahead are more shocking than anything you can imagine. The question isn't just whether Anthony will survive death row. The question is, how do you prove you're innocent when the whole world has already decided you're guilty? The impossible friendship and the fight for freedom. The man's name is Henry Hayes. He's on death row too, just a few cells away from Anthony. And here's what makes this friendship seem impossible. Henry Hayes is a member of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, a group that has terrorized and killed black people for over 100 years. Henry is here because he murdered a young black man named Michael Donald. He kidnapped him, beat him, and hung him from a tree. It was one of the last recorded lynchings in America. Henry's crime was pure hatred racism in its most evil form. So why would Anthony Ray Hinton, an innocent black man on death row, befriend someone like this? At first, Anthony wanted nothing to do with Henry. The other inmates told him who Henry was and what he'd done. Anthony felt sick thinking about it. But death row is a strange place. You're surrounded by death, surrounded by darkness. And sometimes in the darkest places something unexpected happens. Anthony started talking to Henry through the walls. Just small conversations, at first. Nothing deep. But over time something changed. Henry began to see Anthony as a human being, not a color. And Anthony began to see that people can change, even people who've done terrible things. Henry eventually told Anthony something that shook him. He said he was sorry. He said he was taught to hate from the time he was a child. His father was in the KKK. His whole family believed black people were less than human. He grew up in that poison, and it turned him into a monster. But sitting on death row, waiting to die, Henry realized how wrong he'd been, how much pain he'd caused. Anthony didn't excuse what Henry did. He never said it was okay, but he showed him something that Henry had never experienced before: forgiveness. Not for the crime that was between Henry and God, but forgiveness for being human, for being broken. When Henry was executed in 1997, Anthony grieved. He lost a friend, a man who shouldn't have been his friend, but was. This friendship taught Anthony something important. It taught him that even in the darkest places, you can choose to be something other than what the darkness wants you to be. You can choose hope over hatred. You can choose humanity over revenge. And Anthony needed that hope, because his fight for freedom was about to get much, much harder. Years passed. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Anthony filed appeals, legal requests, asking the courts to look at his case again. Every single one was denied. The courts said the same thing over and over. The trial was fair. The evidence was solid. The verdict stands. But Anthony knew the truth. The gun evidence was wrong. The expert who testified was incompetent. The whole case was built on a lie. He wrote letters. He reached out to lawyers. He begged for help. Most never responded. Some sent polite rejections. No one wanted to touch a case that seemed hopeless. Anthony's mother visited him every chance she could. She never stopped believing in her son. She never stopped praying. But watching her son waste away in a cell was killing her. She could see the toll it was taking on him, the gray in his hair, the tiredness in his eyes, the way hope flickered like a candle about to go out. Anthony started to wonder if he would die in this place. Not in the electric chair, but from old age. Maybe they'd forget about him. Maybe he'd just slowly disappear, and no one would remember that Anthony Ray Hinton ever existed. But then in 1999, something happened. Someone finally listened. His name is Bryan Stevenson. He's a lawyer who founded an organization called the Equal Justice Initiative. Bryan and his team fight for people who've been wrongly convicted, people who didn't get fair trials, people the system threw away. Bryan looked at Anthony's case. He read the trial transcripts. He examined the gun evidence. And he saw what Anthony had been screaming about for years. This case was a disaster. The ballistics evidence was questionable. The expert was unqualified. The trial lawyer was overwhelmed and underfunded. Bryan took the case. He didn't ask for money. He just wanted to help. For the first time in 14 years, Anthony felt real hope. Bryan and his team got to work. They hired real experts, people who actually knew what they were doing when it came to guns and bullets. These experts examined the old revolver. They tested it. They compared the bullets. And they found something shocking. The bullets from the crime scenes didn't match the gun from Anthony's mother's house. Not even close. The state's experts had been wrong, or worse, they'd lied. Bryan filed new appeals with this evidence. Surely this would be enough. Surely the courts would see that an innocent man had been rotting on death row for over a decade. But the Alabama courts said no. They refused to grant Anthony a new trial. They found technical reasons to dismiss the evidence. They said it was too late. They said he should have brought this up earlier. Anthony couldn't believe it. He had proof of his innocence, and they still wouldn't let him go. How was this possible? How could the system be so broken? Bryan didn't give up. He kept fighting. He took the case higher to federal courts. Those courts also said no. Years continued to pass. Anthony was now in his 50s. He'd spent more than 2 decades on death row, 2 decades of his life gone. His mother was getting older and sicker. He desperately wanted to hold her hand without glass between them. He wanted to tell her in person, not through a prison phone, that everything would be okay. But would it? Anthony started to lose hope again. Maybe the system would never admit it was wrong. Maybe they'd rather let him die than admit they made a mistake. Then, in 2014, Bryan did something bold. He took Anthony's case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. 9 justices who could finally, once and for all, decide if Anthony deserved justice. The Supreme Court heard the case. They listened to the arguments. They looked at the evidence. And they made a decision that shocked everyone. They ruled unanimously in Anthony's favor. All 9 justices, conservative and liberal, Democrat appointed, and Republican appointed, agreed. Anthony's trial lawyer had been so bad, so incompetent, that Anthony hadn't received the fair trial guaranteed by the Constitution. The Supreme Court sent the case back to Alabama and told them to give Anthony a new hearing with proper experts. Anthony heard the news in his cell. He couldn't believe it. After 28 years, someone finally listened. Someone finally saw the truth. But he wasn't free yet. Alabama could still retry him. They could still fight to keep him in prison. Bryan and his team went back to Alabama courts with new experts. These experts examined everything again, and they confirmed what Bryan had been saying all along. The bullets didn't match. The state's case was built on bad science and worse intentions. In 2015, the Alabama prosecutors looked at all the new evidence. They looked at the expert testimony. They looked at how weak their case really was. And they gave up. They dropped all charges against Anthony Ray Hinton. On April 3, 2015, after spending 30 years on death row, 10,943 days, locked in a tiny cell, Anthony walked out of prison a free man. He was 60 years old. He went into prison at 29. He lost 3 decades of his life. 3 decades he can never get back. When Anthony stepped outside, the sun hit his face. Real sunlight, not the tiny sliver that came through his cell window. He could walk more than a few feet without hitting a wall. He could breathe fresh air. He could hug his mother, really hug her, without bars or glass between them. Reporters surrounded him, asking how he felt. Was he angry? Did he hate the people who did this to him? Anthony said something remarkable. He said he wasn't angry. He said anger and bitterness would just be another prison, and he'd already spent enough time in prison. He chose forgiveness. He chose freedom, real freedom, not just physical freedom, but freedom in his heart. Asterisk. If Anthony's incredible story of survival and forgiveness has moved you, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you think about his journey. Should Alabama have done more to make this right? But here's the part that might make you angry. Alabama never apologized to Anthony. They never admitted they were wrong. And they never paid him a single penny in compensation. In Alabama, there's no law that requires the state to compensate people who were wrongly convicted. Anthony lost 30 years of his life. He suffered unimaginable trauma. He watched men die around him. He lived every day thinking he might be next. And the state that did this to him? They just walked away. Some states have laws that pay wrongly convicted people for each year they spent in prison. In Alabama, nothing. Zero. The state offered Anthony nothing for stealing 3 decades of his life. Anthony didn't let this stop him. He wrote a book about his experience called The Sun Does Shine. It became a bestseller. Oprah Winfrey selected it for her book club. Anthony's story reached millions of people around the world. He started working with Bryan Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative, teaching people about the death penalty and wrongful convictions. He travels around the country, speaking at universities, conferences, and churches. He tells his story not for sympathy, but to make sure what happened to him doesn't happen to others. In 2019, a movie called Just Mercy told Bryan Stevenson's story and his work at the Equal Justice Initiative. Anthony's case was featured in the film. Millions more people learned about what happened to him. Anthony could have spent the rest of his life bitter and angry. He had every right to be. Instead, he chose to turn his pain into purpose. He chose to fight so that others wouldn't suffer what he suffered. So what do we learn from Anthony Ray Hinton's story? We learn that the justice system isn't perfect. Sometimes it's not even close to perfect. Sometimes it fails in ways that destroy innocent lives. We learn that race still matters in America. That police officer who told Anthony he'd be convicted because he was black wasn't lying. He was telling the truth about how the system really works, or at least how it worked for Anthony. We learn that some lawyers and experts care more about winning than about truth. They'll use bad science, ignore evidence, and send innocent people to their deaths just to get a conviction. But we also learn something beautiful. We learn that the human spirit is stronger than we imagine. Anthony survived 30 years in hell and came out still believing in goodness, still believing in forgiveness, still believing that people matter and life is precious. We learn that there are heroes like Bryan Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative who fight for people everyone else has given up on, who see the person, not the case number, who believe that everyone deserves justice, no matter how long it takes. And we learn that it's never too late for the truth to come out. 30 years is a long time, but the truth waited. And when it finally had its moment, it set Anthony free. Anthony Ray Hinton is 70 years old now. He lives in Alabama, not far from where he was born. He could have moved to another state, started fresh somewhere that didn't remind him of what he lost. But he stayed. He stayed because his fight isn't over. There are still people on death row who are innocent. There are still people in prison who didn't get fair trials. There are still people suffering what Anthony suffered. And as long as that's true, Anthony will keep fighting. He'll keep telling his story. He'll keep shining his light into the darkest corners of the justice system. Because Anthony Ray Hinton knows something that most people never learn. You can take away someone's freedom. You can take away their years. You can even take away their hope for a while. But you can't take away who they are. You can't take away their humanity. Anthony kept his. Through 30 years of hell, through injustice and cruelty and despair, he kept his humanity. And that's why his story matters. Not just because he was innocent. Not just because the system failed him. But because despite everything, he chose to be better than the people who hurt him. He chose love over hate, forgiveness over bitterness, Hope over despair. The sun does shine, even after the darkest night. Anthony Ray Hinton is living proof of that. His story isn't just about survival. It's about what it means to be truly free. It's about the power of truth. It's about never giving up, even when the whole world has given up on you. And it's about reminding us that behind every case number, every prisoner, every statistic, there's a human being. Someone's son, someone's friend, someone who matters. Anthony Ray Hinton mattered. He always mattered. It just took the world 30 years to realize it.